Welcome back to the NBA Today free agency special. Look, finally, Richard showed up. Legs is here.
1:30.
Well,
Just FYI.
No.
Kevin Durant requested a trade. Just FYI.
yeah, did you get that?
I don't know if anything happened.
Did you know that, Rich?
First of all, there's an anime conference right next door.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
And you were there.
Yeah, I
you were
was
the
there.
keynote speaker.
Yeah.
Got it. Understood. All right, let's bring in our senior NBA insider, Adrian Wojnarowski, who broke this news. Woj, can you share how all of this went down between Kevin Durant and the Nets?
Yeah, Malika, Kevin Durant has really been non-communicative with the Nets for several weeks. And, I think along the lines of the conversations they were having with Kyrie Irving about his future. Listen, he wanted to help get Kyrie Irving a long-term deal in Brooklyn. That didn't happen. And when Kyrie Irving couldn't find a sign-and trade in the marketplace, opted in to his deal, communication, I think, between Kyrie Irving and the organization and the non-communication from Kevin Durant continued. And so the Nets were preparing for the possibility of this day that Durant would do exactly what he did today. He reached out to Joe Tsai, the owner of the Nets, told him that he wanted a trade, and then Sean Marks, the Nets GM, and Rich Kleiman, Kevin Durant's business manager, they talked about what a trade scenario might look like here. The Nets have been preparing really for weeks for the possibility of Kevin Durant on the market. These aren't the first conversations they're having internally about it. And they had, until the last hour or so, they had shut down teams who had called them. And teams were calling about Kevin Durant and trades. But now, and I'm told, at least half the league had called since the news was reported. And I think you can expect, there's certainly going to be more calls. And I think for teams around the league, they're just trying to get a sense of what the cost would be. And I think Brooklyn's trying to figure out, and they'll start to get a sense of what might be available to them. But I think they believe they've got a trade asset in Kevin Durant at 34 years old, who is under contract for 4 years, that may garner them as big or bigger of a trade package as we've seen in the modern era.
Yeah, unprecedented is the word that keeps coming to mind for me, Woj. What are you hearing about potential trade destinations for Durant?
Well, listen, there's no shortage of teams, and all different kind of teams who have young assets, teams who have draft picks and 25 and under stars, and then established all-star players in other places. The Nets are going to have to really discern between among a lot of different kinds of packages. And I don't think right now they're narrowing it down to say this is going to be a deal that's going to be, let's say, young players and picks. It's going to be, I think the idea is to get all-star players, to get all the available picks from teams. And certainly, listen, you can go through rosters and you can start looking at places, where they have, elite 25 and under players or star players in their prime. But I think for Brooklyn, they've got the leverage they do have is the contract status of Kevin Durant. Again, because he's under contract for 4 years, he has very little leverage about where he can go. Because if you trade him, he's going to have to play for that team, and he's going to have to play for them for a long period of time. And that's why teams are much more willing to unload, the maximum amount of assets versus, like, let's go back to Anthony Davis when he had 2 years left on his deal, and you knew you could give up everything you had, but you might lose him in free agency. That's why the Lakers were so confident. They knew they'd be able to re-sign him, and they gave up certainly a significant package for AD. But right now, if you trade for Kevin Durant, you got him, and he's at the top of his game at 34. And so that really opens up the world to Brooklyn, and it makes these trade talks really interesting.
Woj, you've just been all over this reporting, and when you were on our show earlier, you mentioned that we very well may have seen not only Kevin Durant play his last game in a Brooklyn Nets uniform, but the natural question is, what does all of this mean for Kyrie Irving?
Well, the trade interest in Kyrie Irving for a sign-and trade will be different than what you'll see just trading him as an expiring contract, because in a sign-and-trade scenario, you had to be willing to give Kyrie Irving at least 3 years on a max extension. And when the Nets weren't interested in really doing that kind of a deal with the Lakers, but for Irving now as an expiring contract and a team that essentially might just take him on for the last year of his deal, teams who are talent-starved, who, listen, if certainly the Lakers, a big part of the reason is they know they're not good enough right now. Kyrie Irving delivers a talent, certainly that changes the trajectory for that team. But I do wonder, too, there are going to be teams who would look at a Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant package of trying to trade for both of them. I think right now the focus of teams in the league, there's not a great appetite for Irving, but that doesn't mean there's nobody who will take him. And I do think there are teams who will do it, but it's a fraction of what's available for Kevin Durant. And I think the Nets are going to be open to all of it. I'm told, listen, everyone on their roster is going to be available. They've got to look at every scenario right now to see how they come out of this window of time, what kind of assets they can get back. Would they go completely young, go all picks and young players, or can they bring back established star players for Kevin Durant that could keep them a contender? They don't have to decide that today, but certainly the calls are pouring into Brooklyn.
Yeah.
They don't have to make any. They're going to receive them all.
I know that Perk has a question for you. I want to bring him in just a second, but how are the Nets strategizing right now, fielding all of these calls?
Well, they've been preparing for this, Malika. This wasn't, while the timing of today may have been a surprise, I think there was a sense that it was coming. So they had been planning, and I think most front offices, you're always planning for any number of different possibilities. But when Kevin Durant just was not communicating with the organization, same with Kyrie Irving, I think there was a sense that at some point they were going to ask out. And in this case, Kevin Durant has asked out. And certainly it's hard to imagine a scenario where Kevin Durant would be traded and Kyrie Irving would remain in that Brooklyn organization. I think you can expect if Kevin Durant goes, they'll work really hard to find a way to move Kyrie Irving too.
Right.
Hey, Woj. So I want to know this. If the Brooklyn Nets, they try to trade Kyrie Irving, but they can't find a trade partner, they can't trade him, could they negotiate a buyout and do it that way?
Absolutely. They could do a buyout with Irving. That's one I think that comes farther down the road. I mean, they've got a lot of avenues here to look for trades, package deals, package any number of players together in different deals. So that typically, as you know, Perk, is a last resort, doing a contract buyout. I do think there are going to be teams who have interest in Irving as an expiring contract. But certainly Kevin Durant and finding a deal for him is at the forefront for Brooklyn, because this is going to be a franchise-defining trade, for the next decade plus. They've got to get a maximum return for him.
Well, Woj, I mean, look, I need to know, right? This is breaking news. I need to know. I got questions and I need answers. What is the likelihood of Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving being packaged up and traded together to a destination?
It's certainly a possibility. Again, two things have to happen, right? The team has to want both of them, and there's got to be a deal that makes sense. That's an immense amount of salary going out. I think they'll evaluate all of it. They have to. Certainly Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, I'm sure it's a scenario that's going to appeal to them. They've wanted to play together. They want to continue to play together. But the sense is they don't want to do it together in Brooklyn anymore.
Woj, thank you so much for that insight. We really appreciate it. Do not go too far, because there will be more news and your reporting unfolding throughout the day. Thank you so much for your time. I'm just going to turn it over to the host of this show, Kendrick. Bringing back here with Richard Jefferson, Tim Legler, Big Perk, and Zach Lowe. So we just heard a whole lot of information from Woj. I just want to start with you, Legs. What of all of that stood out to you?
Well, I think a couple things. First of all, it's almost incomprehensible to me to think that those two guys could end up together again. When you want out, you want out, right? Kevin Durant is not very appealing. The situation that's played out in Brooklyn. In fact, this has to go down as one of the most epic failures in the history of this league, does it not? I mean, that was a surefire championship on paper when those three guys came together. And that's what I'm saying. It was the most unguardable offensive trio in the history of this league at the top of any roster. And look what they have to show for it now as they break it up. So it's interesting to me to see what's going to happen. I'm almost just as interested to see what's going to happen with Kyrie Irving.
Yeah.
I mean, where is Kyrie Irving left in this in terms of his value around the league and what you'd be willing to give up to get a guy like Kyrie Irving now? after what's played out the last 2 years.
No, and again, I know this is, Kevin Durant and it's all of the things that we're talking about, but when you look at this situation, do you really think that, this is one of the most epic failures? And again, yes, right now it looks super intense. The Nets had a ton of talent and they built it up. They brought in 2 guys and they gave control to those 2 guys. And I don't want to say complete control, but they gave a certain amount of control, as a lot of star teams do. And people are like, this is what happens when you give it to the players. And you're like, I've seen franchises be ruined by teams, by management, by coaches. I've seen them ruined by everybody. So let's not just start saying here, you can't give players control. That's not true. You just have to make sure who you give control to, who you are taking advice from.
That's the big thing.
That's the big thing. Let's focus on.
Well, we can talk about a very specific who in this case.
Let's focus on the who,
because the who is very relevant.
But to your point, yes, was this team have a ton of talent? But when you look at the talent and you're saying, all the talent, but everyone on this panel knows talent ain't the only thing that wins championships. It's chemistry, it's basketball IQ, and it's availability. And these are things that the Nets were lacking. I don't think, obviously, we know they weren't lacking talent, but chemistry obviously wasn't there. All of the things that they needed to be in that pot wasn't there. And we can say, it was Kyrie, it was this. And I heard you talking about Sean Marks. Sean Marks built up a team, brought in stars. Stars did not behave the way they should, and now they're moving on. I think that the way I look at Sean Marks, he's doing everything right, because if the Nets do this right, they have 2 routes. One, they can farm and destroy any team and pull everything back. The second thing, they will be a playoff team, in my opinion, next season if they do this correctly.
With the departures of Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving.
Go get an all-star.
With Ben?
Let's say hypothetically you can trade for Brandon Ingram. Let's say hypothetically you can get Brandon Ingram a pick and 2 young players, and then you can ship off Kyrie. If you have Brandon Ingram, who's a star, I'm throwing out. Sorry, Brandon, I'm just throwing out your name ideally. But if you put all of these guys together, don't forget they made the playoffs without KD and Kyrie, with young guys that were fighting and all pushing in the same direction.
But they had James Harden.
No.
Oh, you mean before? With Karis LeVert and Jared Allen
and D'Angelo Russell, and it's like they made the postseason before. So if you can, all that talent that you shipped away, if you bring in quality pieces, a young all-star, a top 10 pick, if you bring that all in with what you're asking for.
Yeah, that's fine. It's a lot of ifs, but like Leg said, it still was a failure.
Yeah, 100% a failure.
No matter how you want to slice it.
But
no matter how you want to slice it or dice it, no matter. They had to pick a new coach. They got rid of Kenny Atkinson. I didn't think he deserved to lose his job.
No.
They brought in Steve Nash. Sean Marks had to okay that. As much as KD and Kyrie had power, he still had to approve that. He still had to sign Steve Nash. He had to still bring him back following.
And you know what he also did? Okay. He also re-signed Kevin Durant. And now they're about to get the whole farm for him back.
And he also lost James Harden. He's also about to lose Kevin Durant, who's arguably the best player in the game today. So I'm not saying, listen to me, I'm not saying that all the blame is on Sean Marks, but he should have some of the blame.
That's what I'm saying. You're going to get something about.
I just want to pause. I want to pause for 1 second. Let's just pause and take a breath. Kendrick Perkins just said, could the Nets buy out Kyrie Irving? And it wasn't a ridiculous question. That's the territory of insanity we are in right now.
That's some good work if you can get it. Let me go do nothing for my $39 million and negotiate down a little bit, and then go hit free agency and go where I want to go anyway.
Number 2, Legs just said what I wanted to say, which is like, the whole NBA just watched what happened.
Yes.
Why would I give up my whole team to pair Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant? I just watched this movie. I know how it ended. I saw it.
If these 2 guys went to almost any, there's probably about, let's say, two-thirds of the franchises. If this would have gone on and you would have had a vaccine mandate, you would have had injuries, you would have had all of this stuff, the same scenario would have happened almost anywhere.
It wasn't a crazy question.
No, it
wasn't. But that's what makes it. But that's what makes it so wild.
The third thing I wanted to say is I'm glad we've said Jared Allen's name, because that also throws into relief. Like, let's just remember why Kenny Atkinson got fired or lost his job or whatever terminology they use. A big part of it was he refused to start DeAndre Jordan over Jared Allen.
Over the guy that was an all-star the next year.
Over the guy who now we're looking at as the Cavs as being a real threat to be a riser.
Sit back and just look at the rubble of this and just how ridiculous. I'm with you. Like, why? Am I supposed to call them and be like, hey guys, I know it failed in Brooklyn. Do you promise it's going to work? You promise?
One thing I want to say is I really want to say I want to echo what Richard said. if the Nets handle this situation right, particularly with Kevin Durant and what they get, they're going to be a playoff team next year. They should be a playoff team next year. The concept of, let's just get a bunch of picks and some younger guys that haven't established themselves, I don't think that's what Steve Nash was brought in to coach.
Yeah. That
type of team. They're going to try to get back all-stars in their 20s, probably a couple of them, and picks. And then you can go and you can compete, not going to be a contender, but you can compete for a playoff spot in the Eastern Conference for sure.
Absolutely, and that's why when you're looking at Kyrie Irving, it would make sense to me if we hear later down the road that a team says, something like, well, they agreed to this many number of games played or something like that, some sort of back stoppages that they need to put in order to ensure a little bit of protection here. I do want to bring in our Eastern Conference reporter, Tim Bontemps, who has some news for us. Tim, what do you got?
Well, I just wanted to play, Malik, a little bit off of what Richard and Tim were just saying, in that when you look at the situation the Brooklyn Nets are in, they have traded away their next several drafts because of the trade for James Harden. That, by the way, was only 18 months ago. Feels right now like it might have been 18 years ago when you think about everything that's happened over that stretch of time. But because of that, the Nets aren't in a typical situation where, as those guys were talking about, maybe you tear this thing down to the studs and build this thing up from the ground up with picks and draft picks, like, say, or young players and draft picks, like, say, the Houston Rockets did when they traded James Harden to Brooklyn. So I think the Nets are in a bit of a unique situation here where they can go out and get a bunch of draft picks and get players that are ready to win now and turn around and have guys like Ben Simmons, Joe Harris, Seth Curry on this team, and can be a team that is doing both things at once, able to compete for a position near the top of the Eastern Conference and still get some draft assets to kind of make up for the picks that they've traded away. So because of that, like these guys have been saying, I don't think it's necessarily a fait accompli that we're going to go into next season and the Nets are going to be a team that's winning 20 games and looking like they're going to be in the draft battle. Because of the fact they've traded those picks away, I think you're going to be looking at them going out there, and as Adrian has said earlier, going out and trying to get players that can help them win right now, because they do have a lot of talent on this roster, and they can still be a team that could be a factor in the East, because as everyone has said on the show, when you have a player like Kevin Durant with 4 years left on his contract, you can ask for the sun, the moon, and the stars and expect to get all of it.
Yeah, and Rich Kleiman has told, that's Kevin Durant's manager, our Adrian Wojnarowski, that Kevin Durant would like to be traded, has made a trade request. But Tim, what are you hearing on a timeline for when that could happen? Should we all cancel our 4th of July plans now or what?
Well, I mean, listen, I think in every situation that we've seen here with the Nets, you should probably expect the unexpected. But I think what we're going to see, Malika, more than anything, is that the league is going to be on a bit of a pause here, right? Because when you have a situation like this come up, as Adrian has said, every team in the league is going to be checking in to see, okay, do we have enough to get Kevin Durant? Is Kevin Durant interested in coming here? What is it going to take to get this done? I think because of that, you're not going to be seeing teams going out and making other deals. You're going to see everybody wait to see how is this going to shake out and what is going to happen here. In some ways, it's a little bit reminiscent of what happened when Kawhi Leonard waited to make his decision 3 years ago. There was a bit of a rush on the first day of free agency, and then we all waited for 4 days for Kawhi Leonard to end up with the Clippers and for Paul George to get traded there, and then a whole bunch of stuff happened after that. Obviously, we saw DeJounte Murray get traded yesterday. That became official today. But I think other than that, we're going to be in a bit of a waiting game. And one final point on the Nets. Adrian also reported earlier today that they traded for Royce O'Neal and gave up a 2023 first-round pick, presumably the pick they got from Philly in the James Harden trade there. That, to me, is another indication that the Nets are going to be looking for players that can help them win going forward. That's not a deal you make if you're trying to tear your team down to the studs.
Good point, but we will be in a holding pattern, we expect, until we see what dominoes fall around Kevin Durant. Tim Bontemps, thank you so much. Richard, I know you had something you wanted to add.
Well, no, it's just the more we've been sitting here talking about it, I'll go back and look at the Carmelo Anthony trade from Denver. They fleeced New York. Got everybody. Denver made the postseason, right? Then you go and look at the Lakers when they got Anthony Davis. New Orleans took everything back. Where was New Orleans this year? In the postseason. So it doesn't like it for everybody that's like, oh, the Nets of it. And it's like, no, they gave up a ton of assets and they're going to get a boatload of assets back. So, so that's what I'm saying is like, this is not unprecedented to have a high level player leave a team and then you get enough assets back to rebuild your franchise almost immediately. That's how good he is.
And listen, it's not hard to make the postseason now with the addition of the play-in tournament. The Pelicans made the postseason, and I believe they were 14 games below 500. Yeah. So that's not hard. But another thing that we also
say that to the other half of the teams that didn't.
The other thing that we need to realize, Richard, is that the Eastern Conference is the best conference right now, okay? It's the tougher conference. So if you're going to get something back, you better make sure you're getting something back that's going to move the needle. because Boston is still there.
Oh, you're not
Milwaukee-
talking about contending. You're
Right.
talking about being a
But
respectable place
but
that
listen,
you could possibly
but
get free
even-
agents.
Rebuild your culture.
That you could, thank you.
I understand that, but
culture.
think about this for a second. Even some of the teams that didn't make the playoffs, they were like 4 games above 500 in the Eastern Conference.
That's
I'm just
fair.
telling you.
But I think where
that's
the disappointment comes in, right, is the fact that we were talking about the Brooklyn Nets as not only just a contender, but potentially a favorite not that long ago. And so for a fan base, you know, the fan base that exists in Brooklyn that was thinking about what they could have or could see just making the playoffs, all of a sudden they're not the young, scrappy team that, oh, we're just happy to be there like it was on that initial Brooklyn Nets team where everyone was just excited to see this team in the playoffs. Now there were expectations that come with it. And so to backpedal off of that a little bit, I think that's where it's like, yeah, making the postseason is nice.
No, but the reason why making the postseason is important, and is I'll go back to how the Nets got KD and Kyrie, how the
Yes.
Clippers were able to get Paul George and Kawhi. You had an attractive place with talent,
Yep.
and guys were like, if I go there, that can help. So just like the Clippers got I know they got the trade
Yeah.
in Paul George, but they had young assets to go get it. So you reload with assets, and maybe the next time you trade for a high-level free agent, you clean it up a little bit. You make sure that the culture is first, and you bring everybody in. An example of that is Miami. Whoever they bring in, you're coming in here to be a part of a winning culture. You're not coming in here to dictate how you want it.
Absolutely. We still have so much more to come on NBA Today's free agency special, including it was a little bit quiet in here. So Stephen A. Smith is going to weigh in for the very first time on his reaction to Kevin Durant requesting a trade. Don't go anywhere. That is coming up next.